Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Jnanatimidandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshuru Militamena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Uta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamstra Shri Rupam Sagadatam Sagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamstra Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kupa Sindhu Bevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Srivasri Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, everyone. So, welcome to this continued study of Chapter 2. So, last week we discussed the Arjuna's process towards surrender. And we discussed how in the very first verse Arjuna's compassion was misplaced. Srila Prabhupada guided us that compassion, real compassion, is directed to the soul and not to the body. Just as we would not save the clothes of a drowning person, but we would save the person in a mood of compassion. Similarly, real compassion is displayed when we direct it to the soul. And Arjuna showed us in the 7th and 8th verses the perfection of surrender. How in order to achieve perfection of life, he surrendered so beautifully and so perfectly to the lotus feet of Sri Krishna. And it's very instructive for us in understanding how to approach this process of self-realization and progress in devotional service. It takes a very high mood of surrender, but the fruit, the result of that surrender is perfection, is absolute bliss in devotional service and freedom from faults and mistakes. So it's a very potent experience, sometimes difficult for us to come to that point, and our goal is to make day by day steps towards that mood of surrender that Arjuna displayed, not having expectations that it can happen overnight, but it's certainly our strong desire. We can pray to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu on his most auspicious appearance day, 2 days from today, to have and develop this mood of Arjuna. And as soon as Arjuna surrendered, Krishna began to speak, and he spoke about the topic of the soul. And he immediately got to the root cause of Arjuna's problem or source of his issue, which is he was viewing everything from the bodily platform. And so Krishna began to speak on the topic of the soul, and for 20 verses, from verse 211 until 230, Krishna is going to speak exclusively on this topic of the soul. So we'll now pick up where we left off last time, which was in verse 17 of the 2nd chapter, and we'll continue today until verse 37. So verse 17, Krishna is saying, That which pervades the entire body you should know to be indestructible. No one is able to destroy that imperishable soul. Right? So this section of this chapter, these verses are the Jnana Yoga, the Jnana section of this chapter. And Jnana refers to having knowledge about the difference between spirit and matter. As one performs karma yoga, one purifies and begins to acquire knowledge about this distinction between spirit and matter. And we'll be discussing this yoga ladder in more detail next week, and certainly in chapters 3, 4, and 5. But this Jnana Yoga is specifically referring to this understanding of the distinction between spirit and matter. And knowing the distinction, one abstains from interacting with matter. So one avoids matter, but in this stage, one has not yet understood the Supreme Spirit. And so there is no attachment, it is simply detachment. And so we'll discuss later how it is still an incomplete position, but it's an important stepping stone towards complete realization. Of course, Krishna is going to tell us, don't take the step-by-step path and go directly to bhakti. But this section about spirit soul is within the Jnana section. And then as we get to verses 31, Krishna is actually going to come down to a lower platform on this platform of Karma Kanda, and speak about that. And then from there, he's going to elevate up to Buddhi Yoga. So he is. This is how the next 20 or 30 verses or so will unfold for us, and we'll discuss those as we proceed. So in this verse, in 17, Krishna is speaking to the second part of the verse in verse 16, where Krishna said, "Those who are seers of the truth have concluded that of the non-existent," referencing the material body, "there is no endurance, and of the spirits of the eternal, the soul, there is no change." So here Krishna is speaking about the soul, the second part of verse 16. And the understanding of the presence of soul is proven by consciousness. As soon as there is consciousness, we know the spirit soul is present. And as soon as consciousness is absent, we know the spirit soul is absent. So the body, as soon as there is no consciousness, we know the soul has left this body. Okay? And so the consciousness is not due to any kind of material combination. No amount of manipulation of different materials can create consciousness. So the spirit soul, the proof of the presence of the soul in the body or in anything is consciousness. As soon as it is there, we know the soul is present. As soon as the soul is left, we know there is no longer any consciousness. And it has nothing to do with any kind of material manipulation. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada quotes from the Upanishads about the size of the soul. And it is in several different places explained that the size of the soul is 1/10,000th the tip of a hair. And actually, it is meant just to give us some reference point to the size of the soul. Of course, nothing material can be used to compare something spiritual, but it is to give us a reference point that is very small. And Srila Prabhupada comments in the purport that the actual source of the energy in the body is the soul. Science cannot identify what is it that actually is giving energy to the body, but it is the soul. If it were just foods or our nutrients in the body, then why it would ever die? Clearly, there are nutrients in the body, and still the body stops to function. It is because the ultimate source of that energy, that life force, is the spirit soul. And then one final comment Srila Prabhupada makes at the end of the purport is comparing the soul to the sunshine, as there are unlimited seemingly molecules within the sun rays. Similarly, the spirit souls are innumerable in nature, emanating from the effulgence of the Supreme Lord. Right? So this is discussed in the 17th verse. And then Krishna continues in the 18th verse now to speak about the first part of that 16th verse referring to the body. So he's talked about the soul which pervades the entire body and is indestructible. And now he'll say the material body of the indestructible, immeasurable, and eternal living entity is sure to come to an end. Therefore fight, O descendant of Bharata. So in this 18th verse, Krishna is speaking about the body. He says you should fight because the body cannot be saved. And of course the soul, he already said, is indestructible. So either way, on the soul or the body platform, the conclusion is to fight. Because you cannot stop the death of the body. By you choosing not to fight, Arjuna, you're not going to stop it. It is inevitable. Right? And the soul, he has already said, is untouchable. It's imperishable. So you can't touch that no matter what you do. So leaving the battlefield is not going to save their bodies from harm. They're going to die. Nor is staying on the battlefield going to hurt their soul. So either way, from the platform of the body or the soul, Arjuna, you should fight. So this is Krishna's conclusions in verse 17 and 18 in reference to number 16, verse speaking of both the body and the soul. And one interesting note of this verse is that Krishna is saying that the material body of the indestructible. It references that this body is being used by the soul. The soul acquires this body based on its prior action, just like we may acquire a sweater or a shirt or a pant. But it is not the person. So Krishna is referring here again to the material body of the indestructible, saying that the soul is actually utilizing this body or is temporarily owning this body. Okay. So now we get to verse 19, which is a bit of a tongue twister. And it says, neither he who thinks the living entity the slayer, nor he who thinks it slain is in knowledge. For the self slays not, nor is slain. So put, in simple terms, the soul can never kill, nor can the soul ever be killed. Right? So we can never slay the soul, nor can the soul be slain, is what Krishna is referring to. Again, he's emphasizing the indestructible nature of the soul. And Arjuna telling Arjuna, you can't kill the soul, nor can it be killed. Right? So he's saying, we understand that the living entity can never be the killer of the soul. Right? So Arjuna is not going to kill Bhishma Pita's soul. Right? And this is a somewhat basic concept to some of us who have been studying this for some time, but it actually is a profound realization to be able to understand that when someone dies, the soul carries on, that it is untouched. To know that the soul is never slain is actually a transformational realization to our entire consciousness, how we perceive everything around us. We've been fortunate by the blessings of Srila Prabhupada to have come across this knowledge, but actually this point is not very well understood. And when we see people grieving, for a lost relationship, knowledge about this soul and its continued journey actually is a source of one becoming peaceful through those times of difficulty. So it's a very simple yet profound realization for all of us. Right? And Srila Prabhupada clarifies now in this purport, and he'll continue to do so in this section, that though the soul is indestructible and the body is sure to perish, it does not support indiscriminate killing. The killing of the body, it must be enjoined by Shastra and ultimately by Krishna, not by our own whimsical desires. Prabhupada speaks about the killing of the animals. You cannot say, you try to misapply this logic and say, well, the body of the animal is going to die anyways. No, that is not enjoined in Shastra. And so one must be very careful to understand this discussion in its proper context. And Srila Prabhupada clarifies this, and he'll continue to do so for our benefit in several purports about this sanctioned use of violence. Okay? So now in verse 20, we see Krishna continuing, for the soul there is neither birth nor death at any time. He has not come into being, does not come into being, and will not come into being. He is unborn, eternal, ever-existing, and primeval. He is not slain when the body is slain. So here we see many characteristics of the soul. And again, it is eternal, but then trying to explain it in a deeper level. Krishna has already said, never was there a time we did not exist, nor you. And now Krishna is being more specific, that for the soul, there is neither birth nor death. Right? So there is no beginning or end. And we struggle with this concept. It has not come into being. When it says come into being, it implies there is a beginning. It has always existed. Right? And again, in our materially conditioned mind, we struggle to understand eternal, because everything we see around us is temporary. But we have to take on the basis of Shastra that this is a fact. It has not come into being, nor does it come into being, nor will it stop. So this is very, very important. So we don't celebrate the birth of the soul. There is no birthday. Right? So Srila Prabhupada in the purport explains many nice points about the soul. It does not age. There is no offspring. There is no changes like that of the body. You cannot trace out the beginning of the soul. There is no past, present, or future. The soul is free from the 6 changes. Right? The body, the material body, goes through 6 transformations. It is born, it grows, it reproduces, it maintains, it dwindles, and then it perishes. So those 6 stages, all material bodies go through. But the soul, it does not. Right? And the changes of the body have no impact on the soul. As the body ages, the soul does not age. The soul remains as is. Right? So we're getting some deeper realizations about the details of the soul. And Srila Prabhupada gives the analogy in the purport about the sun. That even if we can't see the soul, we should know it's there. Just like in the presence of light outside, we know that the sun is there, even if it's hidden behind clouds or still crossing the horizon. Though we cannot see the sun, we know it's there by the presence of light. Similarly, by the presence of consciousness, we can have proof positive that the soul is there. So, Srila Prabhupada guides us there. And then he begins to speak about the 2 kinds of souls. And we'll see this elaborated in verse 22 in the purport, but we'll discuss it here about the soul and the super soul. Though they have their similar quality in nature, they are very distinct quantitatively. And so this very vivid example is given of the soul and the super soul, or Jivatma and Paramatma, in the comparison of the 2 birds in the tree. The 2 birds are sitting on the same tree, but one bird is enjoying the fruits, eating the fruits of the material world, trying to enjoy, that is the jiva, and the other bird is simply watching, observing, that is Krishna, the super soul. And one is captivated by the fruits, and the other is just watching patiently. And the enjoying bird is struggling very mightily. And what is the solution to its struggle? When that enjoying bird simply looks to the observing bird. When the jiva looks to Paramatma, then everything becomes clarified. Right? Instantly all becomes good. So we see Krishna is actually seated so close to us, in our heart, right next to jiva is Paramatma. And as soon as we turn our face to ask Paramatma, as we saw Arjuna ask of Krishna, then all of our suffering, anxiety, moroseness, all of that is immediately dissipated. So the 2 birds are situated on the tree, and the super soul is just waiting patiently. When the jiva will look to me for answers of how to come out from this struggling and this suffering. When we left the spiritual world, Krishna said, okay, I'm coming with you and I'm going to reside in your heart. And whenever you are ready to come back, I will not be far. I will be sitting right next to you. And so we see this explained. Srila Prabhupada begins this in the 20th verse and provides the references from the Upanishads in the 22nd purport. All right? And there is a difference in consciousness between the jiva and the Paramatma. Right? So the jiva has consciousness of its own body. If I stub my toe, I can realize that. Even though it's the toe and not the head, I have consciousness of my entire body. But your jiva, you only have consciousness of your body. When I stub my toe, you do not perceive it. But the super soul, Paramatma, has realizations of everything, complete. So he perceives everything. All right. So this is the distinction. And Prabhupada, characterizes the super soul, saying that Krishna is the fountainhead of the super soul. So we make sure we understand that when we say Krishna is our heart or super soul is in our heart, they are one and the same, because Krishna is the source of the super soul. Right? So this attachment to the body, then, and Borijan Prabhu in his class gives a very nice example that if I'm not the body, then why does my consciousness feel the pain and pleasures of the body? Krishna has already told us to tolerate. And this is because when we identify with the body, then we experience its pains and pleasures. But in reality, the spirit soul has no pain and pleasure. It has only ananda. So, and the example is given of, one who is very attached to their car. They have a brand new car. They have worked very, very hard to acquire it, and they're driving it around. They are so attached and obsessed with the car that as soon as a stone hits the car from the truck in front of it, that driver feels pain. Though the driver was not hit by that stone, the car was hit by the stone. Because of its strong attachment to that car, the driver feels pain. So similarly, our consciousness is affected when we become overly attached to the body. So this bodily concept is what leads to happiness and distress. Because otherwise, the soul is always in a purely blissful state. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. Okay? So in the 21st verse now, Krishna continues, O Partha, how can a person who knows that the soul is indestructible, eternal, unborn, and immutable kill anyone or cause anyone to kill? So here Krishna is saying death is only of the body, and that is not who we are. We cannot kill anyone. Only the body can be destroyed. So this knowledge should lead Arjuna to fight. He is not killing anybody. It's just simply the perishing of the body. And again, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada speaks about this indiscriminate killing. And here we see, the very, specific references. And Prabhupada uses the example of the judge. If the judge condemns someone to death, he cannot be blamed for that violence, because he is committing that violence on the basis of a justice system. But actually the person who committed the violence initially, the murderer, who is then killed, actually is benefited. So the appropriate use of violence actually leads to the benefit of the recipient of that violence. And we'll see this more directly in a couple of verses. But so Krishna, when he's telling Arjuna to fight, he must have some higher purpose that does not require actually any further discussion. Right? So violence has its proper utility, and it must be understood, though, according to knowledge based on Shastra. So violence is enjoined based on Shastra. And in the Manu Samhita, it is the law book for mankind, as Srila Prabhupada comments in this purport. It provides when violence can appropriately be used. And it's important to note that this violence, when it is enjoined in Shastra, it is beneficial for both the recipient and the doer. So while we may see on the surface that it is violence, but it is actually beneficial, right? And the example is given of the of the animal sacrifices. There are shastric injunctions for the sacrifice of animals, but when that sacrifice is done according to Shastra, the animal itself is liberated and given a human form of life, and forgoes having to go through that evolutionary cycle of so many different species to regain this very important human form of life. So actually, by the act of appropriate sacrifice, that animal is given a higher life. So it is actually benefiting. But due to the inability of us to follow such sacrifices, all of this has been outlawed by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and said the only sacrifice we have to follow, that we should follow, is the Sankirtana Yajna. So, important again, we are not, this body is not a justification for whimsical killing or violence indiscriminately. It must be done according to Shastra. So very, very important for us to continue to remember and not allow ourselves or anyone else to take this and apply it incorrectly. So in the 22nd verse, Krishna speaks this very famous verse: as a person puts on new garments, giving up old ones, the soul similarly accepts new bodies, giving up the old and useless ones. Now again, Krishna, we see here, is using analogies and metaphors very nicely to be able to help us understand the changing of the bodies. And he compares it to, as a person puts on new garments, giving up old ones. The soul does the same. Right? So Baladev Vidyabhushan is explaining that Arjuna is thinking that he does not want to be the cause of them changing bodies, depriving them of the happiness they get from their current bodies. Oh, I really like this body, it's so beautiful. So Arjuna does not want to be the cause. But Krishna is saying that change is inevitable. Not fighting is not going to save the body. Anyways, who laments when someone changes an old pair of clothes for a new one? We actually rejoice. We get happy when we get new clothes. So, why, Arjuna, you should lament? Your fighting here is going to give them new bodies. Right? So, Krishna is now continuing his defeat of Arjuna's arguments. Right? And Prabhupada comments in the purport that the changing of the bodies is conducted by the grace of the supersoul. According to the jiva's desires, the supersoul carries out and enables the soul to acquire body after body. Right? So, and this knowledge we are getting from Krishna in this Bhagavad Gita, this jnana, typically is only realized after intense meditation. This jnana path. But Krishna is giving, by his mercy, this realization of this very subtle topic of the soul very, very clearly and easily for us, right in the beginning of this second chapter, without so much austerity, without so much arduous, intense austerity. So we're very grateful that we have this opportunity. And then Srila Prabhupada makes a very important point in this 22nd verse, and I wanted to just read the quote that Srila Prabhupada says here, that one who lays down his life on the sacrificial altar or in the proper battlefield is at once cleansed of bodily reactions and promoted to the higher status of life. So again, we spoke about that violence being beneficial for the recipient. So Prabhupada is saying one who lays down his life in this way actually is benefited. Right? So when killed in the right way, so Duryodhana and all the others, they're going to suffer incredible reactions, sinful reactions for all the activities they did against the Pandavas. But by dying on the battlefield, they actually are going to become relieved from those sinful activities. They'll be cleansed of those sins. And furthermore, in the presence of Krishna leaving their bodies, they'll be delivered to even higher planets, even to the spiritual world. So actually, it is merciful for for Arjuna to kill if he really has compassion. because he's actually going to save them from so much future suffering by being killed in a righteous way. Right? So it's actually the complete opposite of what Arjuna's initial realization was. And again, based on Shastra, we see the very important conclusions here. So Krishna continues describing the soul now and how it is untouched by matter. 23rd verse. The soul can never be cut to pieces by any weapon, nor burned by fire, nor moistened by water, nor withered by the wind. So there's a very logical and scientific reason why the soul can never be burned by fire or withered by wind, or dried by the fire or moistened by water. Why? Because the soul is made up of spirit, and spirit can never be touched by matter. All these weapons are all of material nature. So the most giant nuclear bomb has nothing in comparison to the spirit soul. So nothing matter, nothing material can touch spirit. Thus, it is unchangeable by any material circumstance. None of these weapons can change it, right? So just like, if you try to cut a stone with a piece of paper, nothing will happen because you have an inferior object trying to change a superior object, paper versus stone. Similarly, anything material, the sharpest of sharp knives, is an inferior object trying to change a superior object, the spirit soul. So thus, again, very scientifically, the soul can never be altered by any material influence because of its nature of being made up of the spiritual energy. So very, very important. So, when we see Krishna hurt in battle or his toe pierced by an arrow, his toe is not pierced by an arrow because that arrow is material. It is some metal or stone. So, but his body is fully spiritual. Right? Unlike us who have a distinction between body and soul, Krishna is all spirit, Satchitananda. So that is a pastime of Krishna allowing such an experience. But it is not actually his body being reduced. Otherwise, then this whole verse would be deemed inaccurate. So we can understand that. Also, Prabhupada guides in this purport about the Mayavadi philosophy. This idea that we were cut from Krishna and that eventually we'll combine back. No, that is not true because we are eternally separated expansions. Right? We are eternally. It is not that we were cut off from Krishna and then eventually will be glued back. No, that would change the nature, the constitution of the soul. So Prabhupada is saying that we are eternally partial, eternally separated. And it's a very, very important point in understanding, some of the other philosophies that exist, that we are eternally separated. And then Prabhupada comments here that the jiva is prone to be covered by the illusory energy, and thus we become separated from association of Krishna. Just like sparks of fire, although one in quality with the fire, are prone to be extinguished when out of fire. So this living entity, when they become separated from Krishna, our original consciousness becomes extinguished. Just as a spark, when it separates from the fire, loses its consciousness. Okay, 24. This individual soul is unbreakable and insoluble and can neither be burned nor dried. He is everlasting, present everywhere, unchangeable, immovable, and eternally the same. So again, we're continuing to see here that the soul is unchangeable, right? Because it cannot be touched by fire or even the sun. Because it cannot be touched by fire, even on the sun there are souls. The bodies will burn, but the soul will not burn. So there are living entities even on the sun planet. And so we know that there are living entities everywhere. And again, this Mayavadi philosophy is defeated because of this nature of the soul being unchangeable. If it is independent now and it is going to merge later, it means the soul is changing. But in fact, it is not the case. Right? So when we speak about our conditioned state, this unchangeable means that the soul is eternally pure. It is 100% always pure. It is full of Sat, Chit, and Ananda. So when we say, I am impure, what are we speaking of? The soul is not impure. It is the covering of the soul that is blocking our pure consciousness. So the impurities are not the soul has become impurified, because if that were the case, the soul would have changed. It means the impurities is referencing to the covering of the soul, not the soul itself. So a very important point, which can give us confidence in how I'll ever purify. Well, the soul has remained pure. We simply have to remove the covering. Okay, Krishna will continue. It is said that the soul is invisible, inconceivable, and immutable. Knowing this, you should not grieve for the body. Again, Krishna is continuing, and this repetition is meant for emphasis and establishing the importance of this topic. Right? So it is not due to a loss of things to say. Krishna is confused. No. He wants to make this point very, very clear. And so there is no doubt in addressing this eternal nature of the soul. And so this is our real identity and is untouchable. So why to lament? And Prabhupada references in his purport a very important point, that this topic of the soul is very subtle. We cannot understand it with our own analysis, our own scientific means with a microscope to try to see the soul. We must rely on Shastra. We can't try to weigh the soul or try to see it by some light in the heart. No. We must take the knowledge of the soul as it is by Shastra, from Vedic wisdom. That is the only way to know about this nature of the soul. So Prabhupada is giving us wonderful topic. So now, the final verses on the topic of the soul are presented here in the next 5 verses. So Krishna now shifts gears a little bit by saying, if however, so he's spoken about the soul, its eternal nature, and how it is distinct from the body, which is always destined to perish. But now Krishna is going to give an alternative idea. He's not substantiating, but saying, if however you think that the soul, the symptoms of life, will always be born and die forever, you still have no reason to lament, O mighty armed. So Krishna is telling Arjuna now, even if you think that the soul is material and it is going to be born and die, still there is no reason to lament. So now Krishna is presenting a non-shastric viewpoint, which will lead him to the same conclusion. You should fight. So why is there no reason to lament if you have this atheistic view? And let's be very clear that considering the soul to be material is an atheistic view. But if it is just a bunch of chemicals, well then, what is the loss of killing some chemicals? If a bunch of chemicals have come together to create this form of life, then when you destroy them by your so-called arrows of fighting, those chemicals will then just recombine at a later time. The law of conservation of energy says nothing is created or destroyed. So by temporarily separating these chemicals, what's the loss? They'll just reassemble at a later date. Right? So if you think the soul is constantly, being born and died, then still there is no reason not to fight. So either way, if you believe in the Vedic perspective that the soul is indestructible and the body is perishable and constantly changing, and that you cannot harm the soul, and that the body is going to die anyways, then you should fight. But if you believe in this atheistic view, the scientific view, that life, body is just a combination of matter, then you should also fight. And we know Dr. Henry Monson, he studied all the value of all the materials in the body. It's only worth $2.25 if you add up all the water, the calcium, the phosphorus, all the different minerals. All the matter in the body is not worth very much. So either way, Krishna is telling him, you should fight. And there's another kind of subtle point that Srila Prabhupada brings up in this purport that's worth noting, that if you don't believe in rebirth, the transmigration of the soul, then why Arjuna should worry about the sinful reactions? If he's viewing this from a bodily concept and there's no continuation into the next life, then what are you worried about future suffering? Right? And many people use this logic, they don't think about next life and the potentially degraded position and the future suffering because they don't understand the soul, and so they don't care to think about the reactions of their work. So if we don't believe in the rebirth, then actually there is no scope to consider sinful reactions. Right? So, of course, Arjuna was thinking on the bodily platform, so that logic around not wanting to fight because of sin becomes itself refuted. So just a subtle point that's made here. Now 27. One who has taken birth is sure to die, and after death one is sure to take birth again. Therefore, in the unavoidable discharge of your duty, you should not lament. So Krishna is saying, okay, if you're on the bodily platform, well, death is certain as soon as one is born. And as soon as one dies, another birth is certain. So why to lament? Just doing your duty. Not doing your duty is not going to save them from death. Right? And why is it his duty? Prabhupada comments again in a purport. Because a Kshatriya must protect society from aggressors. Not to protect one's own ego or fame, but to protect others. 28. All created beings are unmanifest in the beginning, manifest in the interim state, and unmanifest again when annihilated. So what is the need for lamentation? So again, Krishna is speaking on the bodily platform. That he says if all there is body, well, he should fight anyways, because it is manifest and then unmanifest. That's the nature of it. And Srila Prabhupada, is certainly emphasizing the Vedic perspective of the non-existence of the body, right? But the body, it's not worthy of lamentation, right? And he compares it to the dreaming-like state. Right? So, but even if you take this atheistic view that this body and soul are matter, just like a clay pot. If a clay pot is broken, there's not much to lament. Simply take that pot and remake it, because it is all going back there. It is unmanifest, it becomes manifest for some time, and then goes unmanifest again. So, Prabhupada gives the example of the big skyscrapers. They build a skyscraper and then tear it down and reconstruct it. They're just recycling the material elements. So similarly, Arjuna, if you think that this is all just matter, then why are you lamenting? Right? So this is important here. Of course, the ultimate perspective is knowing the real self, knowing the spirit soul, and this is the point of real self-realization, right? That the word self-realization means to understand this, that I am actually spirit soul. Now we get to the another famous verse in this chapter, the amazing verse. Right? So in 29, some look on the soul as amazing, some describe him as amazing, and some hear of him as amazing, while others, even after hearing about him, cannot understand him at all. So we see the importance of knowing about the soul. So there are three amazing aspects that are described here. One, those who can see the soul, they are amazing. Who can see the soul? The self-realized devotee, who realizes they are a spirit soul. And we know it is not so frequent. It is actually quite rare. So those who can see the soul, they are amazing. The soul itself is amazing. As we've already heard, it is eternal, unchangeable, untouchable, all these wonderful characteristics we have already discussed. And then 3, the power, the ability to see the soul is amazing. This self-realization is an extraordinarily powerful consciousness. It transforms our whole understanding. and brings about great peace and happiness. So the soul, those who can see the soul are amazing, the soul itself is amazing, and the power to see the soul are amazing. So these three things are referenced here. And it's very rare to find someone who truly knows the soul, and even more rare to find someone who can get the full benefit of knowing the soul, knowing what to do. And so Srila Prabhupada says in here, I quote, "But if somehow or other one is able to understand the subject matter of the soul, then one's life is successful." So we see it right here. How to make a successful life? We must understand the subject matter of the soul. And what is most amazing is how Srila Prabhupada, with his extraordinary ability, has made the topic of the soul so understandable in these purports. This topic, is so difficult to understand. It typically comes after intense austerity and so much meditation and study. But Srila Prabhupada, in just 20 or 30 pages of immaculate purports, has made this topic of the soul very digestible for us. It is quite an extraordinary presentation, these purports, to make this very difficult topic accessible to us. So we're very grateful with these compelling analogies and amazing precision and the simple explanations. We can actually understand to some degree this topic of the soul. Okay. So now we get to the concluding verse of this section of chapter 2, this Jnana section. "O descendant of Bharata, he who dwells in the body can never be slain, therefore you need not grieve for any living being." So again, this is the summary verse. We've already discussed it. Don't grieve for the living being because the soul is untouched and the body is temporary anyways. Okay? So again, violence is not encouraged, but at times when necessary, according to Shastra, it must be done. And Srila Prabhupada reminds us in this concluding verse. And so this concludes the Jnana section of chapter 2. And so now Krishna is going to transition from the Jnana level to a lower level. One of Arjuna's reasons for wanting not to fight is he said, "I will not get any happiness." So Krishna is now going to address Arjuna's objection that there will be no happiness if everybody he wants to enjoy the kingdom with will perish. Right? So he's speaking on this Karma Kanda platform at this point. And so Krishna now will carry this theme through the next 8 verses. We'll discuss 7 of them today. So in verse 31, "Considering your specific duty as a Kshatriya, you should know that there is no better engagement for you than fighting on religious principles, and there is no need for hesitation." So here, now, Krishna is telling Arjuna that you have desire for sense gratification. You want to enjoy. Okay. If you want to enjoy material happiness, again, moving down from the Jnana platform. Jnana platform is on a spiritual level, but now he's moving down to the Karma Kanda platform. Saying if you want to enjoy, then the best kind of material enjoyment is pursuing regulated sense enjoyment as enjoined in the Vedas, these Karma Kanda processes. By doing so, one can enjoy great opulence, heavenly beauty, heavenly bodies, and celestial airplanes. And all of that is achieved by doing one's duty. So on the material platform, you have this swadharma, this duty, and nothing better for a Kshatriya than to fight on religious principles. This is part of the Varnashram system. So Krishna is telling him that by doing your duty, you're going to generate great material rewards if you want them. So while Arjuna thought, hey, I'll get no happiness by fighting, Krishna is saying, no, by doing your duty, by following this swadharma, you're going to be able to enjoy the material benefits. Arjuna was fearing sin, and he'll address that one in a moment, but Krishna is saying, doing your duty to fight is equivalent to a brahmana lighting a fire or doing a fire sacrifice. So Arjuna thought to kill was a sin, but Krishna is saying, no, to do your duty as a Kshatriya is no different than a brahmana performing a fire sacrifice. And so this is very important. And as we mentioned earlier, and Prabhupada comments specifically here, but I mentioned it earlier about, that when these killing is done, all are benefited, right? And the animals who are sacrificed, they immediately come to the human form of life. But again, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, due to the inability to properly perform these sacrifices, has banned and outlawed them and says, just chant, just chant, just chant. Right? But this fighting as a Kshatriya, and Kshatriya, Prabhupada explains, means to protect from harm, to give protection, is giving happiness also to those who are slain, to those who are killed, because the opening the doors of heaven for those people. So not only will he enjoy the material benefits of doing his duty, those who are killed are also going to enjoy, because they are going to be elevated to a higher status. So it is a win-win situation, right? So this is very important, and it is a win-win. Arjuna thought it was a lose-lose, but in fact it is not. And Prabhupada comments that the Kshatriyas, they are even allowed to hunt in order to hone their skills for the ability to protect. So in order to do their duty, this is enjoined. Not to satisfy their tongue, no, but to hone their skills in order for them to perform their duty. This is sanctioned. But again, one must follow very, very carefully. And then Prabhupada comments at the bottom, at the end of this 31st verse, very importantly, that there are two swadharmas, or duties. Until one is liberated, one has these duties based on one's varna and ashram, based on the qualities they have acquired from the material modes. They have a duty. But once one comes to the spiritual platform, their duty transcends, and their duty becomes not material, but spiritual, based on the injunctions of Guru and Krishna. So, we'll continue discussing. Now 32, O Partha, happy are the Kshatriyas to whom such fighting opportunities come unsought, opening for them the doors of the heavenly planets. So as I just mentioned, fighting will get you to heaven for really nice type of enjoyment, Krishna is telling Arjuna. And you'll open the doors for Bhishma and Drona, to go to Swarga Loka. So what could be better? This is a win-win. You win and they win. So the blood spoiled and spilled will lead to their promotion. Right? So what could be a better outcome? So Arjuna thought that this was a lose-lose. Right? His logic was, if he wins the war, he is going to lose because he will incur sins and thus suffering, and he'll be unhappy because there'll be nobody to enjoy the kingdom. But if he loses the battle, he was going to die. So either way, he saw the fighting or not fighting as a lose-lose. But here, Krishna has turned that logic completely upside down. He says, no, it's a win-win. Because if Arjuna wins the battle, he's going to enjoy the kingdom, and those who have perished on the battlefield are going to enjoy the heavenly pleasures. And if he loses the battle, he's going to go to heaven. So either way, it is a win-win. Again, on this platform of material happiness, ultimately, Krishna is going to bring Arjuna to the highest platform and say, you should do your duty because I am instructing you, and that is on the bhakti platform. That is the highest reason to fight. But even on this lower platform of karma kanda, it is a win-win, and it's completely opposite of what Arjuna thought. So in the 33rd verse, now Krishna is going to say, but don't think abandoning your duty is going to help you. If, however, you do not perform your religious duties of fighting, then you will certainly incur sins for neglecting your duties and thus lose your reputation as a fighter. So Arjuna thought that, hey, it is sinful to kill my guru and elders. But Krishna is saying, no, it is actually your sin to avoid your duty. And why was it his duty to fight? Because of Kshatriya's responsibility to protect. The Duryodhana and the Kauravas were performing the 6 types of aggressive activities. And thus, his duty was to fight. So Arjuna thought, hey, if I fight, I'm going to incur sin. But Krishna is saying, if you don't fight, you are going to incur sin. And this is the the aspect of material consciousness. Everything is opposite to what we think. You know, we are programmed in society to think, acquire wealth, and everything will be great. But our spiritual consciousness says simple living, high thinking, complete opposite. You know, and this is the material consciousness, right? So in the 34th verse, now we'll just finish up here quickly. People will always speak of your infamy, and for a respectable person, dishonor is worse than death. So one of the qualities of a Kshatriya is they cannot tolerate dishonor. So that pain is so unbearable. Krishna is advising him as a friend, saying, trust me. You will suffer greatly if you run away from this battlefield. Arjuna thought he could escape the difficulties of the war by leaving the battlefield. But that dishonor that would come to him by fleeing the battlefield, that would be worse than death. So Krishna, as a friend, is giving him some sage advice. That don't think retiring to the forest is going to help you. You know, we see this in the medical world, right? Sometimes we think, prolonging the life by living on some, ventilator or something is going to be nice. But actually, all we're doing is extending a very miserable situation. Okay? So, again, on the lower platform of what will make him happy, this dishonor is miserable for a Kshatriya. But on the platform of bhakti, we know amanina manadena. The devotee does not care for any dishonor. They do not expect any respect. They only give respect. So of course Krishna right here is speaking on this, karma kanda platform. So we must understand ultimately in a devotional mood, one does not even care about their dishonor. But certainly in this context, that would be worse than death for Arjuna, speaking as a Kshatriya in his duty. Okay? Now 35 and 36. The great generals who have highly esteemed your name and fame will think that you have left the battlefield out of fear only, and thus they will consider you insignificant. And then 36. Your enemies will describe you many unkind words and scorn your ability. What could be more painful for you? So Krishna now is addressing Arjuna's mode of compassion, or mood of compassion. He says, don't be foolish and think you'll be complimented for walking off. They're not going to think you left out of compassion. They're going to, make fun of you and think that you are leaving out of fear. So, don't think that this compassion is really going to work. So finally, in the 37th verse, we get the summary now of this section. O son of Kunti, either you'll be killed on the battlefield and attain the heavenly planets, or you will conquer and enjoy the earthly kingdom. Therefore, get up with determination and fight. So Krishna says it's a win-win. You'll get happiness either by enjoying the kingdom, or you'll get happiness by entering the heavenly planets. Either way, it is a win-win. Right? So Krishna is emphasizing with determination. Right? Don't do your duty half-heartedly. And this determination is a key result of our success in devotional service, as we know. So now, just briefly to summarize how every one of Arjuna's arguments were turned upside down, completely inverted. Right? So Arjuna thought it was compassionate. He was acting out of compassion. But Krishna said, if you think you're the body, it's still better to give them a new one. And if you think they are the soul, then by killing them, you're going to elevate their soul to the heavenly planets. So compassion would mean to fight even on the bodily platform. Certainly on the spiritual platform. Right? Because on the spiritual platform, he is relieving them from all their sins. Duryodhana and all the Kauravas were destined to suffer so much. But by being killed in the presence of Krishna on the battlefield, what better compassion? They would become free from all of that. So certainly, compassion would lead Arjuna to fight, completely opposite of what he had thought from his own vision. And this self-realization would lead one to direct their compassion to the soul, which is what really matters. So Arjuna should be thinking, what is best for their soul, not their body? And certainly what is best for their soul is to free them from all this suffering that is coming for their sinful activities and elevate their soul to a higher body in the heavenly planets. And that can be done if he kills them on this battlefield. So that is real compassion. Then the second argument he gave, or reason not to fight, was no happiness. And again, Krishna said, well, first you should tolerate the bodily happiness, like the changing of the seasons. He spoke that very early in this second chapter. But even on the lower platform of karma kanda, as we just discussed, doing his duty will give him great material rewards. One gets great rewards. But not doing his duty is going to lead to this dishonor, which will be very painful and very difficult for him to bear. So fighting will allow him to enjoy the kingdom or get elevated to the heavenly planets, and while similarly knowing that those who have been killed will also be elevated. Right? So either way, he's going to be more happy by fighting, because either he will get the kingdom or he will be elevated to the heavenly planets, and he can rest assured those who have died on the battlefield will also be relieved. So either way, there is more happiness in fighting. Then he talked about sin, and Krishna said, no, it is not a sin to kill on principle. It is actually a sin to avoid your duty. So if it is sanctioned by Shastra, it is not a sin to kill. Of course, it is a sin to kill unsanctioned, but this was being sanctioned, not only by Shastra, but ultimately by Krishna. But it is a sin to avoid your duty. So again, Arjuna's conclusion flipped upside down. Then he talked about the loss of family traditions, and Krishna will explain this more elaborately in the third chapter. But if you don't do your duties, others are going to follow. So Krishna is telling, rise above this karma kanda, these temporary results, and perform. You set an example for others to follow. And of course, the indecision, it is clear as day what to do. And thus Krishna said, with determination, now fight. It is a win-win. So here, now all of Arjuna's reasons have been upended by the right knowledge. And we know what is the key to Arjuna's clarity. We have to see things from the perspective of I am spirit, soul, I am not this body. As soon as we view that situation from that perspective, what to do becomes very, very clear. But without it, looking not through the lens of I am spirit, soul, everything will be blurry and unclear and will result in distress. Okay? So this is a little bit of a long section, so thank you for your patience. So now, any questions or comments on these verses? These 21 verses we discussed today.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhuji, you did talk about the Mayavadi philosophy and how it is defeated as regarding the soul. Can you please just elaborate on that? I mean,
yeah.
What quality of the soul makes make whole philosophy defeated?
Yeah.
Defeated?
So what quality of the soul makes the Mayavadi philosophy defeated? So there's a couple. One, it says here repeatedly that the soul is unchangeable. So if it's unchangeable, how it can be right now separated from Krishna, but then later we can merge into Krishna. That would change the nature of the soul. Because today we know it is separated. So the Mayavadis will say that the soul has been cut, separated from Krishna, and then now it'll later be reattached. Just as if we have a leg on a table and it's separated from the table, and then we can reattach it. Well, in that separated state, it is different than in its attached state. So here the fact we're seeing over and over and over again is the soul is unchangeable, immutable, right? So that upends that complete philosophy immediately.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dharma Pranam, office to Srila Prabhupada Guru Maharaj. Nice lecture, Prabhuji. Can you please explain this win-win situation one more time? Like, little bit slowly, if you can.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes. So the win-win situation, and it's a win-win on many platforms, right? So let's take the most important platform, which is on the platform of the soul. So if Arjuna has compassion for Duryodhana and Bhishma Pita and Dronacharya, which he said in the beginning, right? I am overcome by compassion. So viewing it from the perspective of the soul, what is best for their soul? Now, because of Duryodhana's actions, we know there is future suffering coming to him. For every sin, there is a reaction. So he is going to suffer greatly. So now, if Arjuna fights and kills Duryodhana on this battlefield, then because they are leaving their body on this very auspicious place in the presence of Krishna, they'll actually get elevated. They'll become cleansed of their sins. So by killing them, he is going to cleanse them of their sins. And for him, he is doing his duty. He is following the instruction of Krishna. There is no better activity for him. So it is a win-win. If he were to not do his duty, then he would actually suffer. Right? So on the platform of the soul, it is good for him and it is good for them. Now, on the platform of material happiness, the same conclusion comes. That for Arjuna to enjoy happiness, he has to do his duty. If one performs their varnashram duties, then they can acquire the different material happinesses. And his duty is to fight as a Kshatriya. So he will enjoy material happiness. And those who will perish will, either on the bodily platform, they're going to get a new and fresh young body. But also on the soul platform, as we just mentioned, they'll be elevated to the higher planets. Right? So it is a win for Arjuna to fight, and it is a win if he wins or loses the fight, I should say. Right? So it is a win-win on two dimensions. Let me kind of further clarify. It is a win for both parties, both sides. They both benefit by Arjuna fighting. Now, from Arjuna's perspective, it's also a win-win, because if he wins the battle, he is doing his duty, he is not incurring the sin, and he can enjoy the heavenly planets. On all three platforms, it's a win. If he loses the battle, he dies doing his duty, and by doing so, he'll attain higher planets. So whether he wins or loses the battle, it's a win-win for him. So the win-win can be looked at both perspectives, from both parties and from the perspective of Arjuna. In both ways, it is a win-win. So we can say there are 4 wins. Is that okay, Mataji?
Yeah, now things becoming clear. Thank you, Prabhuji. And one more thing I was curious to know is like Duryodhan and all, now they will be elevated by Krishna clearing the bodies here. Are they being elevated to the Swargaloka, or are they being elevated to the spiritual world?
Well, that depends on the mood in which they are destroyed. But what we see referenced here is that they'll be elevated to the higher planets. So to the Swarga Loka or higher material planets, not yet liberated. We know that when Krishna himself kills a demon, they attain a type of liberation. But here in this battle, that is not quite the end result.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dandat Pranam.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu. Very, very nice class, Prabhu. So I have a couple of questions. First one is I wanted to understand with respect to Mayavadi philosophy, what is the difference between soul and the consciousness?
The soul is consciousness. They are indistinguishable.
So there is no difference between soul and the consciousness.
No. Yeah, you understand soul by consciousness. That is a feature of the soul. Just like light is a feature of the sun, they are inseparable.
Okay. Okay. The second question is actually Arjuna is already surrendered to Krishna, saying that I am your disciple and you instruct me clearly what is best for me.
Hmm.
But, in the verse 2. Basically 2.24, 2.25, where Krishna is saying that the soul, if you think the soul is only the kind of subject matter,
Yeah.
it is not real. You don't need to worry about it. Although Krishna is trying to tell in the like a U-turn, basically taking a different turn. So why Krishna is trying to tell in that manner instead of telling as it is continuously?
Because,
As it,
because yes, you're right. Arjuna has surrendered to Krishna, so he could simply say, "You fight because I am instructing you to do so, and that is best for you," and everything could be ended. But we know that Krishna is speaking for our benefit as well. And so, what Krishna is doing is providing the conclusive from all perspectives. He's ultimately going to tell him, now the only thing you need to consider is devotional service, which means you follow my instruction. So that's why he's going to say at the end, Sarva Dharmam Parityaja, all dharma you should abandon. Right? So he's giving right now all the different reasons, but what Krishna wants to say is that from any perspective, even if you're an atheist, the perspective should be to fight. Right?
Okay.
But he is going to close out, and that's what any good speaker will do. They will close out any gap that could be presented in the logic, right? Because someone might say then, well, what if I just don't want to listen to Krishna? What if I'm not surrendered to Krishna? Well, still the conclusion would be Arjuna should fight, right? So Krishna is providing perfect conclusive logic on all perspectives. But then he's going to tell him, now all of that you abandon and just surrender unto me. I will take care of you.
It is just to drive away his confusion if it is there.
Mainly all of ours.
Yeah, ours basically.
Yes.
And the other thing is, as Mataji asked that, like Krishna saying that all the warriors who die in the war they're going to achieve the higher planet. But initially we understand that when King Kuru, when he established the Kurukshetra, so he got this boon that whoever give up their body in fighting at this location, give up their body here in Kurukshetra, they're going to get the moksha, the liberation, not the higher planets.
Yeah. So but again, it is based on the consciousness. So if one is guaranteed moksha, still one has to have that desire also. So if one is not forced up into any place, so still one has to have the consciousness and the desire to enter. Just like it's explained when Vasudeva got to express his desire that all the living entities be liberated. And the question is, did it happen, and did the whole world become empty? And one of the explanations is that everybody was given the opportunity, but still we have to have the desire to go.
Okay.
So it is not guaranteed, but the opportunity is there. Just like when you're leaving your body in the presence of Krishna can take one to the spiritual world. But in a worst case, they're going to be elevated to these higher heavenly planets.
Basically, they are slowly uplifted to go to the spiritual plan. That's.
But if they leave, like as Bhishma Pita, right? We know when Bhishma Pita leaves, he leaves meditating on Krishna. And we see how he very beautifully enters the form of Krishna, and then in Prabhupada comments how that was his pathway back to liberation. So Bhishma Pita achieved it because that was his desire.
Okay.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Prabhu, like as long the soul is connected to these three modes, is it possible to, remove all the impurities?
Yeah. So, now remember, the soul is not connected to these three modes. The soul is being conditioned, it is being covered, right? So the soul remains pure and untouched, right? But by uh, practice of devotional service, one can transcend the three modes, right? And Krishna is later going to say this mamchayo vipacharena bhakti yogena sevita sagunan samititetan brahma bhuya kalpate, that by practice of unfailing devotional service, one can transcend the gunas, sagunan samititetan. So one can transcend the modes. How? By the practice of devotional service. So the living entity can become completely free and enter this liberated state still within the material world by the practice of devotional service. Krishna says in the 7th chapter that one can be, overcome Maya, this divine energy of his, by surrender. Ma'amevelya prapadyante etam tadam tarantite. Right, that one can overcome this daivihesha, this very divine energy, by surrendering to Krishna. So by the practice of bhakti, one can overcome the influences of the three modes. But remember, the soul is never contaminated by the three modes. There is a conditioning, a covering of the soul.
Okay. Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, thank you. Anything else?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, I don't have a question, but I have some kind of different understanding. Because as you said that Mayavadi philosophy says that there is no difference in consciousness and the soul. But looks like
Mayavadi philosophy does not say that.
They're like a little dull-headed, because if anybody, if my hand is cut, okay, it has some consciousness until for some time the hand is getting like a shake and it has some taking some trouble. After some time it becomes dead anyway. If an animal is cut, for some time the animal is going to have problem, means is going to have the suffering and keep on moving for some time. Then it stops moving. That actually shows that the presence of consciousness in the part of the body even after we cut the part of the body for some time. But once the soul leaves, the complete consciousness of the body will go out, isn't it? It's so simple to understand. Then why the Mayavadis are so much writing books and even being so dull-headed? And I'm little confused, like why there's so much wonder about this Mayavadi.
Envy of Krishna, simple.
Okay.
It's ego. I want to be God. If I want to be God, then that's the philosophy I follow. Simple.
Yeah, it is very simple to understand. Why this is the right answer. If they have envy, of course, they can do it.
Envy. That's why we're here in the material world.
Yeah.
We had envy of Krishna. So Mayavadi is the epitome of envy of Krishna, because they say he does not exist. You cannot become more envious of anyone when you deny someone's existence. That is the highest degree of envy.
It is not fair.
It's simple. That's why we say don't bother. If someone has that, just move. There's no point. And in fact, you can become disturbed. No matter how strong you are in devotional service, when you come in contact, there's high potential to become disturbed. And if you follow and watch Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teachings, he is so strict on this topic that even Mukunda Datta did not get Krishna Prema initially. To show us, this was his dear associate. But to show us, don't even come within 1,000,000 miles of such content. Just move away. It is so dangerous for your bhakti. So dangerous. because it is so envious, it's so rooted in impure thoughts.
Yeah, and Prabhupada says dull-headed, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Understand that. Okay. Thank you, Prabhupada. Very nice. Very nice.
Hare Krishna. Anything else? Okay. Well, thank you very much for your kind attention. We'll discuss again next week, next section of chapter 2. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Hare Krishna, everyone.